Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to 2 Minute Talk Tips. Today's tip: repeat the question. I was recently at a panel discussion hosted by fantasy writer Pat Rothfuss, and he did a masterful job of managing the audience. And when it was time for audience members to ask questions, and they asked those questions, Pat would go ahead in his booming voice and repeat the question. Why should you repeat your question? A few reasons. First of all, to make sure that the audience heard it. Remember that when you're speaking, you are standing, so your voice is going to carry better in that room. You're better positioned for projecting your voice by simply standing up. You're also facing the audience, and they are facing you. That means the questioner is typically facing you as well, which makes it harder for other members of the audience to hear the question that person is asking. Repeating the question also gives you an opportunity to confirm the question so that you make sure you understand just what is being asked. If the questioner is asking a lengthy question and maybe prattling on a bit, this gives you an opportunity to summarize the question that they asked you as you repeat it back. Also, in summarizing and in repeating the question back, you can make it more answerable. This can be really important with questions that might ramble, or if the question is not quite on topic but is related. This gives you an opportunity to finesse that question so you can provide the best answer possible. When you repeat the questions back to them, people will feel acknowledged. The audience members will actually hear the question that was asked and not ask you to repeat it anyway, and you get better control of the conversation. So when people in your audience ask a question, be sure to repeat it back to everyone. Stick around, and after the break, I'm going to talk about 5 things that I saw presenters do during my vacation. So last week, I took a cruise. I spent the week on Joko Cruise number 7. It was a week-long cruise off the coast of Mexico, and it was filled with nerd and geek-oriented entertainment, activities, board games, and just general friendly glee. It was a great time, and really, I would recommend anyone who is interested in geek culture to check it out at jokocruise.com. The next sailing is actually going to be in February of 2018. And while vacation is fun, I still can't turn off my public speaking brain. And so this week, I'm going to talk about 5 things that I saw on the cruise that are good to keep in mind as a public speaker. Those 5 things are using rituals, building a recurring framework, owning the stage, understanding the power of the stage, and investigating alternative timers. So first of all, I want to talk about rituals. And rituals are a very interesting thing. We most often think of rituals in a religious or spiritual context. For example, I spent 16 years in Catholic schools, and in grade school, every day began with morning prayers and the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you ever find yourself in a group of people who spend significant time in Catholic grade schools and you want them to be quiet, all you have to do is start making the sign of the cross. You just start with, in the name of the, and the room will go quiet as everybody slips back into those grade school rituals. On the cruise, there was a similar and, of course, very secular ritual. Paul Sabourin is one of the hosts of the cruise and also one half of the musical comedy duo of Paul and Storm. Each day, he would come out onto the stage and say, "Good morning, students," to which the entire assembled mass of attendees would respond with, "Good morning, Principal Sabourin." And then Paul would go ahead and kick into his morning announcements. It's been a running joke on the cruise for years. But what's really interesting about it, though, is that it still has that power of a ritual. The power of the ritual is that it is a shortcut to a mindset. And when you use a ritual, you get your audience's attention because they know about it. You signal to the audience that something is about to happen. They're going to maybe be hearing some particular information. Maybe the show is about to start. Maybe you're simply asking them to be quiet. Maybe you're going to transfer other information to them. When you give them that signal, they can actually set their brains to receive that data or to receive that experience. Also, when you launch into that ritual, you actually get a shortcut to control of the room because suddenly everybody has an automatic response to what they're doing because they know they're part of the ritual. And with many rituals, it goes beyond just the conscious response and into the subconscious response because it's become such a habit and such a part of their life. That ritual helps you get control of the room that much faster. And the other thing it does is that using rituals like this actually gives everyone a shared experience. And it's an opportunity to build community. And it's not just that interaction between that speaker and you in the audience. It's that interaction between that speaker and you in the audience and everybody else in the audience. It's a communal experience. In addition to relying on appropriate rituals, another tool for expressing an idea is to establish a repetitive framework. Mary Robinette Kowal is an author, voiceover artist, and professional puppeteer. And during the cruise, she hosted a talk on world building for sci-fi and fantasy authors. So what do I mean by world building? Well, that's setting the culture and the environment that your story, your piece of fiction is going to take place in. You know, what kind of planet it is, what the technology is, how people behave, how people dress, how the culture works within that context. The best sci-fi and fantasy novels have very rich worlds and universes surrounding them. And in many cases, building that world can be as important as the characters and the plot. They are all elements that come together to give that reader a great experience. And world building itself is a fascinating topic to explore, and Mary's talk on the topic lasted almost 2 hours. The key to world building for her was around 3 key topics. To successfully build a world, you need to be able to answer 3 different questions: what, how, and what effect. With those 3 questions in mind, she would then talk about building the world around a particular character, around a particular geography, around a particular gee whiz tech element, which is how we actually got into a discussion about sentient easels, or even about a culture. And that was a fascinating discussion in and of itself. What I found most interesting was the use of the framework. Because as she talked about building this world, and as she talked about all these different elements that go into it, and as she engaged with her audience and invited audience participation in her talk, she would always go back to the framework of what, how, and what effect. Each time the audience member brought up a new suggestion, they would start analyzing it in terms of the what, how, and what effect. Relying on this framework gives her a couple of advantages in world building and in the talk itself. When you're able to use a recurring framework like this, it gives context to the discussion throughout the talk. Constantly going back to this framework also made those most important elements of the discussion, the framework itself, even more memorable. It gave the discussion a certain rhythm, and it gave the audience something they could take away with them. So when you have the opportunity, when you're working through a project, when you're teaching a topic, it can be very helpful to establish a framework that you can keep referring back to. And the more you can refer back to that framework, the tighter the structure of your discussion and the more memorable your key points will be. Another great skill that takes practice is also to own the stage. Wil Wheaton had a stage show, and yes, it is that Wil Wheaton of the Big Bang Theory fame and of Star Trek Next Generation, of Stand By Me, and all sorts of other TV, movie, and writing projects. During Wil's show, what he did was he read Choose Your Own Adventure novels to an audience of hundreds of people. If you were a kid in the 70s or 80s, you probably remember Choose Your Own Adventure novels. These were novels where the story was broken up across a book, and you would read a couple of pages, and then you would have to choose what step you want your character to take next. And then the book would either tell you to go to, page 46 or page 55, depending on your particular choice. And the choices that you made ultimately determined the fate of your character in the book. And Wil read Choose Your Own Adventure novels to an audience of hundreds. It's something he actually does online on a weekly basis as well. And what he would do is he would start reading the book, he would get to a decision point, and then he would point to an area of the crowd and ask for a volunteer in that part of the crowd to go ahead and choose which option we were going to take. So it was a whole communal experience of reading these novels, and it was a lot of fun. What was most impressive, though, was the way he owned the stage. This was on the main stage in the big theater, and he just owned it. He walked out by himself with his books and planted himself on stage. It was a simple, powerful, and confident statement. And every eye in the theater was focused on him and hanging on his word. We were all just waiting for him to speak. Now, whether Will really was supremely confident or not, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter. The fact is, he acted like it. And when you act confident, you feel more confident, and that's where your power can come from. He had several other people in the theater to handle microphones, and he would direct them to individuals in the different sections of the audience that he chose. And even though the emphasis was on crowd participation, he still owned that stage, and he still drove the crowd where he wanted it to go. It was a masterful demonstration of stage presence. Being the only one on a stage, though, is not the only example of the power of the stage. And when I talk about the power of the stage, it's one of those things where even if you're not supremely confident, it means that you can still make hundreds of people do what you want them to do. During a performance of Nugget Man, Paul and Storm's song that is a tribute to the inventor of the technology that gives us Chicken McNuggets, he had the crowd singing along. Pacific Northwest ukulele expert Molly Lewis was also on stage, and when it was appropriate in the song, she raised her hands and started waving them back and forth in a rhythmic sway. And then hundreds of other people in the audience began doing the exact same thing because she was on the stage and she gave them that direction. Now, Molly was in the background. She wasn't even performing on this song. She didn't even have to say anything, and yet she made hundreds of people do something. That's how closely the audience pays attention to what's happening on the stage. The audience wants you to tell them what to do. That's some of the power you have as a speaker when you are on that stage, is that the audience is waiting for you to give them direction. It's waiting for you to tell them what they should do, what they should listen to, what they should understand. That's the power you have as a speaker. And when we see that in the performance context with musicians on stage and somebody in the back is just there getting the audience to start to sway back and forth, that's a true element of power there. Now, some of you may be thinking, yeah, I can't do this. I can't make people do anything. Well, next time you're doing a presentation, especially if it's in the middle of the day or after lunch, take a moment and try asking everybody to just stand up for a minute, to stretch. Use your hands and use your voice and tell them to reach, to stretch, or maybe to introduce themselves to their neighbor, depending on the context and whether or not they know each other, and other things like that. And what you'll find is that even if you are a novice speaker, people will do it because you're the presenter, because you have that stage, even if that stage is just the front of the conference room and not the main theater on a boat. But because you have that power by being on the stage, people will respond to it. Enjoy that power, and please use it responsibly. And finally, one other thing I want to talk about is the use of alternative timers. Now, I've talked in the past about using timers for keeping track of your own presentation. I'd still encourage you to do that. But one of the groups on the boat was a team from Cards Against Humanity, which can be a fun and completely not safe for work game. But they were doing an improv activity, and they needed to use a 30-second timer to give a group an opportunity to prep. Now, they could have used an hourglass or a stopwatch, or they could have counted out 30 Mississippis, or any number of other ways of getting to 30 seconds. What they did instead, though, was they used YouTube. They found a series of videos that are 30 seconds long. All sorts of different viral type videos and funny videos and entertaining videos. And when it was time to start a timer, what they would do is just start the 30-second video. So instead of watching the hands sweep around the clock, instead we got to enjoy cat videos and other related awesomeness. What I like about this is that it's a different approach to managing time, and yet it still accomplishes that goal. And especially in this type of context where your audience might otherwise be bored watching a clock go, you can actually give them some additional entertainment in a different and a creative way. They did it from their web browser. You can also go ahead and if you have separate 30-second videos, you can even include those in PowerPoint, and you can do also some other things like that. So as you're going ahead and building out presentations, one thing you may want to keep in mind is that if you need a timer, look at some alternative ways that you could introduce timing functions. So that's just a sampling of what I saw from performers and presenters on the Joko Cruise. As you look at building out other talks and other discussions, look for opportunities where you can incorporate rituals or build a recurring framework, how you can own the stage, how you can understand the power of that stage, and how you can even investigate using alternative methods of keeping track of time. And if you'd like to learn more about the cruise, go ahead and visit jokocruise.com. So when you're on vacation or just consuming entertainment, what do you see performers and presenters doing that we can all use in our professional lives? Go ahead and let us know in the comments for this episode at 2minutetalktips.com. And of course, if you enjoy 2-Minute Talk Tips, please leave us a review in the iTunes podcast store. You can also subscribe to 2-Minute Talk Tips in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. That's it for this week. I'm Bill Monroe. Remember to repeat those questions and to look for presentation tips in your everyday life. Build on those tips every day and don't get best, get better.